Welcome to Win the Day from Back to the Bible. I'm your coach, Pastor Nat, helping you win the day wherever you are. That's why today we're going to talk about embracing the law of the trade-off. The law of the trade-off is one of the most valuable concepts I've learned and taught in personal development. John Maxwell taught this concept in the 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth. The law of the trade-off, it says that in order to go up, you need to give up. In other words, in order to grow or to achieve, you're gonna need to sacrifice something. This can be short-term, it can also be long-term loss. But in the end, it's worth it. The Apostle Paul, he believed and taught this concept nearly 2,000 years ago. Don't believe me? Listen to Paul's words in Philippians chapter 3. Indeed, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For his sake, I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish, in order that I may gain Christ and be found in him. Paul has been pressing the importance of salvation by grace alone. He said in the previous verses, if anyone had a reason to get into heaven based on their resume, on their performance, it was him. It's Paul. But Christ helped him realize he was actually wasting his time. He realized his spiritual bank account, it was in the red with no way to get back to black. That is with the exception of Christ. You see, that's where we pick it up in verse 8. He says, I count everything as a loss in comparison to knowing Christ. I want us to camp here for a moment because Paul says, my prestige, my influence, my reputation, my money, my power, my prestige, my relational capital, it was actually worth nothing compared to knowing Christ. Now, knowing Christ doesn't mean knowing of, but rather intimately, personally knowing through a relationship. It's deeply personal. It's deeply committed. You see, nothing compares to really knowing Christ. But then Paul drives it home by saying, I gave it all up. I gave it all up for Christ. Why? Because compared to Jesus, and being in a relationship with him, it's rubbish. Now, you may not know this, but the word that he uses here is the equivalent of a curse word. But since this is a Bible teaching podcast, we'll just translate it as rubbish or poop. Okay, that's the clean way of saying it. Paul says, all the good things I have done, all those religious acts that I did, it was just one big poop-stained underwear. That is what he is saying. And he says, I'm going to throw it away. I'm going to burn it. Because Christ, he's worth it all. What about you, friend? Is Christ that precious to you? If God called you to give up your golf for Christ, would you? Is he worth it? If God called you away from your family, would you go? Is Christ worth it? If God called you away from your Netflix or your Amazon Prime shows, would you go? Is Christ worth it? If God called you away from your ministry, would you do it? Is Christ really worth it? These are deeply convicting thoughts. So here's my challenge for you today. Practice the law of the trade-off. What is it in your life that you need to give up to grow closer to Jesus? It may be short-term trade-offs to get back on track. But it may be a long-term commitment for many reasons. Remember, Jesus is worth it all. When we give up the things of this world for knowing Christ, we don't just win the day, we conquer it.